on the symbols that carry our identity across generations. One of the most powerful of these is the last name, the surname, Isbongo, in isiZulu and other Nguni languages, or Sefane in Setswana. African surnames are not just names, they are living connections to ancestry, to spirituality, and the stories of where we come from. So we're going to be speaking about this. We're going to be touching base with the spiritual and life advisor, Reabetswekatleho Mogase. It's like a whole sentence. Reabetswekatleho Mogase, who will be helping us to unpack the heritage and meaning behind African surnames and why preserving them is so crucial at this time as we look at contemporary African spaces. Thank you very much for joining us, Reabetswekatleho. It is wonderful to have you join us on Channel Africa.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate that you appreciate my name.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the honor. Let's talk about just your work. Perhaps it's a good place to start in terms of, just you filtering in work of spirituality into coaching and advisory. What exactly does your work entail?
So for me, I've been in the space for quite some time. As a spiritual practitioner, I was called quite young. So been in this space since the age of about 13, 14. And I say spiritual practitioner across the board. So I used to be a church leader, I used to be a pastor, and I'm in the African spirituality space at the moment. So going on about 20 or so years in that space. And I share a funny story for a lot of people that one of the first few people I've gotten to engage with was a couple in their 40s who asked me for marital counseling while I was in my teens. So it gives you a sense of the kind of stuff that I've had to sort of navigate and deal with. And it's been a blessing and a privilege to be able to weave purpose into the work that people are doing across different spaces. Yeah.
It is 18 minutes after 1 p.m. Central African time. We are currently joined by spiritual and life advisor Reabetswekatleho Mogase to help us unpack the significance of heritage, the cultural meanings behind a surname or a last name on the African continent as an African, and why we need to take it seriously. Especially considering the recent ruling, the Constitutional Court ruling that men are allowed to take their wives' surnames. What does that? What is the significance of that? And we unpack what we need to know with Reabetswekatleho. We'll continue the conversation right after this.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
Je, una jambo lolote akilini mwako? Je, una shauku kuhusu masuala muhimu? Na je, una maoni ambayo unataka yasikike? Kweli, hili jukwaa ni la kwako. Piga simu au tuandikie kwenda WhatsApp namba alama ya kujumulisha 2760552594 na tutakupigia simu.
Mtangazaji wa habari zetu za Afrika Kusini mjini Johannesburg.
Hivyo unaweza kuwa mshirika kwenye matangazo yetu. Sio mazungumzo tu, ni fursa yako ya kuchangia maoni yako na kushirikiana na jumuiya ya wasikilizaji wanaotamani mtazamo wako. Tufuate kwenye mitandao ya kijamii. Tembelea tovuti yetu www.channelafrica.co.za na uwe tayari kushiriki na kuchangia maoni yako kwenye Channel Africa. Channel Africa, mtazamo wa Kiafrika.
The Upside, 1 to 4 p.m. Central African Time. With Tebogo Lekhuleni and Mmatsheko Mosito. Only on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
It's 20 minutes after 1 p.m. Central African time. Thank you so much for joining us on The Upside this afternoon, your gateway to the good life. We continue our conversation with Reabetswekatleho Mogase, spiritual and life advisor, to tell us about the significance of a last name. Reabetswekatleho, let's talk about that. Why is a last name, a surname, so important, especially in the context of an African?
So I think it's important for us to, locate it within the history. And we all know that surnames, as they are now, are colonial impositions. Yeah. We perhaps are people of clan, right? We're people that would say, for instance, ke Mogase, but Mogase is a name, right?
Yeah.
And somewhere in my clan names, Khonale a line that says, Legasa Legaramisa Batho, you know, Bantse ba re tlotlo, ba e bone e tshabang. And we continue with that sort of lineage. But why it's important, and I shared previously on a TikTok of mine, as it were, that these clans weave history and the present and the future together. And I'm of the view that they are particularly important because we've got to add to them. So for me, I've added to my clan praises. So I've added a few lines in there, to particularly speak to where we are right now as a family, and also to speak to where we're going as a family. And I think that generations have got to do that, because the clan praise or the lineage is a history of the family. But that history doesn't just stop with particular people. And also, I think one would notice that in a lot of spaces, there are male and female figures that are identified within these clans. If you look at perhaps in the East African and West African context, there's matrilineal societies where those clans speak a lot about women in the space. They are already included in that space. They've already got space to exist, to thrive, to flourish. And then in other spaces where it might be more the masculine side and the patrilineal, if you will, lineage and heritage that comes through. So, and I know it might be something that a lot of people might not necessarily think that a conservative or traditional person like me would say, but the ruling, in fact, restores order in some respects, this recent Concord ruling, because at a spiritual level, in some instances, you've got to also take a look at what lineage you are going to deal with. What are the things that you're bringing across in terms of these two lineages coming together? What are you taking from this side? What are you taking from the other side? And I'm a firm believer in the fact that as it relates to marriages, partnerships, it's about purpose. And the best person for the job has got to do the job. If you are not necessarily the best person to lead, your genitalia should not dictate that you must.
That is fascinating, perspective. I didn't think about it in that way. And thank you very much for bringing sort of an African cosmology, angle into this conversation, because surnames are important throughout the African continent, Ramogase. So let's talk about that and unpack it by looking at the belief around how our surnames carry spiritual weight. You know, a surname can reveal a person's destiny, spiritual path, inherited traits. Because Lina, for example, and they say Okarabo, you just become the person that people go to for answers, for example, so your name just precedes you, as it were. So let's unpack that and the mythological origins, if you would, around us as divine beings and how we carry these names in our being, in our ways, in our behaviors.
And I think that it's important for us to also perhaps recognize that as Africans and indigenous people across the world, actually, not just Africans, we ascribe meaning to stuff, right? So we take a look at things and we say, because we are the people of the rock, and this rock is going to be particularly important to us, or we're people of a particular tree, or we like this particular animal, because we like this impala,
yes.
Or because we see these hippos and we're just like, oh my gosh, they really have these traits. So we ascribe that meaning, but there's also meaning that we get from those things, right? So if you look at the Kwe or the San people, the impala is a very sacred animal to them. Even pre-colonial history, I mean, these are animals that would be revered in the same way that the cow would be for the Hindu people. But these things are all located somewhere in history, whether it's oral history, whether it's things that are said, they are spoken somewhere. And so these clan praises tell us a little bit about who we are, who we were. But also I think we need, like I said, to not necessarily just add to them, but appreciate where we are and where we're going. And so we're able to insert other little bits and pieces that say, okay, maybe we're not necessarily just the people of the tree, but we're the people of this particular being, this particular animal. We do these kinds of stuff. You guys that are there are able to insert lines in your clan praises that speak about the fact that you're mass communicators. You are envoys of your families that speak on a daily basis to millions of people. That's something you're able to say without any kind of dilly-dally or doubt. And can you imagine what happens 3-4 generations from now when there's a kid who is a descendant of yours, there's got to give a speech to 1,000 people, reads their clan praise and realizes, shucks, my great-grandmother, my great-grandfather used to speak to millions on a daily basis. What does that mean for me? It means I can do it. So let me go and do it.
Powerful.
What impact does it have on a person if they are disconnected from the meaning of the history of their surname that they carry?
I think it makes you a tree that literally is hanging in the air. You know, you're still growing because you've got moisture that you're getting, but you're not going to get the nutrients you need. And so you might be tossed to and fro. And, permit me to say, by my perspective, I think that you may be somebody that would want to get this kind of meaning because it's important to you. But as you get it, it might also cause you to ask certain deeper questions, because there are some things that we've got to get rid of, even in our clan praises. We may be people where it's said that we are the stubborn ones. We are the ones that will never move. Whether we've got to take that out. It might be stuff that we're so good about, in that in terms of the inheritance that we have, we've got to be able to deal with both these generational shortcomings, but also these generational blessings that exist, and how we're going to navigate the two and make sure that these things work in tandem.
All right. On that note of, just the generational gaps and, how things were done before and how they're done now, let's talk about the role of young people and how they are going to be carrying forward the value of last names, especially in today's society. Perhaps we can even use this, this new ruling as an example. And when we look at the world, where the world is going, for example, it's becoming a global village. We're not only now intersecting through different tribes, it's also now with different races as well. So what role do young people play in carrying forward the value of the surnames that they were born with?
I think that all people, in fact, have got a role to play in their families, and young people more especially have got to say, what does it mean to be a Mogase? What does it mean? What are the things that we are clear? These are the stuff that we subscribe to as the Mogase family or as a particular family. And anyone who doesn't subscribe to those things, then we've got to question whether they're actually family members. And I say that on purpose because there are some people that may be family because they subscribe to the stuff that you're saying, but they're not blood. And when you get into the spiritual space, to take a little bit of a tangent and I'll come back, you begin to realize that there are some people within the lineage who are not necessarily there by blood, but they are there because they agree with the purpose of this home. And so I think it's incumbent on young people to be a whole lot more careful, to be a lot more careful about their purpose, to be a lot more careful about the partnerships that we're choosing, and to be a lot more careful about where it is that we want to go. And I think it's also important that we understand that our society, in its original nature, pre-colonization, is actually a society that understands the value of both the divine masculine and feminine. There are functions to both. We are not a patriarchal society. I don't see that in the reading. And why I say this is because we are losing so much as it relates to what is termed culture behind patriarchy. And when we start to see it, we realize that there's a lot more that women did and still continue to do within the home. I mean, if you take the role of a Rakadi within the house, that home cannot do anything if Rakadi is not present. And that Rakadi is the one that's got to make sure that some of these principles are there. But so I think the older Rakadi has got to sit with the younger Rakadi, and they've got to go and debate, what are the things we're going to take forward? What are the things we're not going to take forward? And what does this family look like in 2100? We often say that our country doesn't have a plan at times, and we don't do long-term planning and so forth. But families have got to do that. because that's where royalty comes from. It's families that have decided we want to dominate. And so we've got to take those decisions. We've got to say, what does the Mogase family look like in 2100, in 2150? And what are the decisions we're going to take today to make sure that it gets there?
What a valuable conversation.
Wow.
Reabetswekatleho, where can we find you on social media?
Geez, it is Reabetswekatleho Mogase. That would be, I think, the name on Instagram as well as TikTok. That's where you can definitely find me. And then on LinkedIn, it's Reabetswekatleho Mogase. So those are the spaces. But if you search Reabetswekatleho Mogase, you'll find me across these platforms.
Love it.
It's an unfamiliar name, so you'll really find
a beautiful name, but it is a beautiful name. Reabetswekatleho, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. What a valuable conversation it's been. Go check him out on social media platforms if you'd like to link up and connect with him and get a bit more insights on the history and the value, the significance of a last name. It's 31 minutes after 1 p.m. Central African Time. Let's get the latest in sports with Musibudi Makura.
Sports.